Thomas sat in the pilot chair of his small survey ship as it drifted down through the clouds of the unknown world. The planet had been marked on the charts as uninhabited, only a green dot in a sea of black space. He had landed on many empty places before, collecting samples and scanning terrain for the fleet. But something about this world felt different. The light was softer, almost golden, and the forest stretched wide like endless seas of green. He slowed the ship as it neared a clearing. Tall trees bowed slightly under the wind, their leaves glowing faint blue at the edges. He could hear the faint hum of the engines fade as the landing struts touched the soft ground. For a long moment Thomas sat still, listening. The world outside was alive with sounds. Not mechanical, not industrial, but natural. Chirping, flowing water, rustling leaves. It had been many years since he had heard such peace. Thomas opened the hatch. Warm air filled with strange scents rushed inside. It smelled fresh, like rain on stone mixed with sweet fruit. He stepped out, boots pressing into moss that glowed faintly when touched. He crouched down, brushing his fingers along the soft plants, surprised at the spark of light that followed his touch. He smiled. This was why he had joined the explorers. Not for medals, not for pay, but for the wonder of places no human had walked before. He walked slowly across the clearing, scanning with his handheld device. The machine beeped, marking safe levels of air and water. Thomas took off his helmet, breathed deeply, and felt a sudden rush of relief. The air was clean, warmer than expected, and gentle on his lungs. He looked around, eyes catching on movement. The trees swayed again, but not all of the movement was from the wind. In the shadows of the trees, Thomas saw something. At first he thought it was an animal, small and crouched low, but then he realized it was standing upright. It had arms, slender and long, and a head tilted with curiosity. The figure froze as soon as Thomas noticed it. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Thomas slowly raised his hands to show he carried no weapon. He had trained for moments like this. First contact could happen anywhere, even on worlds thought empty. He spoke softly, though he knew the words would mean nothing to the watcher. "I am Thomas. I come in peace." The figure shifted. The leaves parted slightly, and now he could see her more clearly. She was not human, yet she was not so far from human that he felt fear. Her skin was pale with a silver glow under the fading light. Her hair was dark, long, and seemed to catch bits of the forest's glow. Her eyes were large, shining faintly blue. She looked young, though Thomas could not guess her true age. For a long while they only stared at each other. Then carefully she stepped forward. Her movements were graceful, like water flowing over rocks. She kept her hands close to her chest as if ready to flee, but her eyes stayed fixed on Thomas. Thomas did not move. He knew sudden actions could end the fragile moment. He waited as she came closer, stopping a few steps away. She tilted her head, sniffed the air lightly, and spoke a sound. It was soft, almost like wind through reeds. He could not understand it, but it did not sound hostile. Thomas slowly lowered himself to the ground, sitting cross-legged to appear smaller, less threatening. He tapped his chest. "Thomas," he said again clearly. The alien girl blinked, then pointed lightly at him. "To Mass," she repeated, the sound rough but close. A small smile touched his lips. She had tried. That alone felt like a bridge between them. He nodded eagerly. "Yes, Thomas." She studied him with curious eyes. Then she tapped her own chest. The sound she made was soft, like a falling leaf. "Lyra," Thomas repeated it gently. "Lyra." She nodded once, the movement tiny but clear. Then silence returned, filled only by forest sounds. Neither knew what to do next. Thomas reached slowly into his pack, careful to move in full view. He took out a wrapped bar of dried fruit from the ship stores. Opening it, he broke off a piece and held it out. Lyra tensed, uncertain. She stepped back once, then forward again, her eyes locked on the food. Thomas waited, hand steady. After a moment, she reached out, fingers brushing against his. Her skin was cool, smooth like polished stone. She took the piece and sniffed it. Her nose wrinkled, then she placed it against her lips. She tasted it carefully, her expression unreadable. Then her eyes widened slightly and a faint sound of approval left her throat. Thomas laughed softly, more in relief than joy. Lyra tilted her head, watching him laugh, then made a short sound that almost mimicked it. Her attempt at laughter was strange but warm. Thomas felt the moment lighten. She moved her hand, pointing toward the trees, then back at him, repeating the gesture. Thomas guessed she wanted him to follow. He hesitated only a moment. This was what he had dreamed of, true first contact. He stood slowly, slinging his pack over his shoulder, and nodded. Yes, I follow. Together they walked into the forest. The world grew brighter as night fell. Many of the plants glowed in patterns like stars on the ground. Small creatures darted in and out of the light, wings shimmering like glass. Thomas kept close to Lyra, his eyes wide in wonder. She moved with ease, stepping over roots and streams as if the forest welcomed her. At last they reached a place where the trees opened into a circle. Strange stones stood upright, marked with glowing symbols. The air here hummed softly, filled with energy Thomas could not measure. Lyra placed her hand on one of the stones and looked at him. Thomas touched the stone too. It was warm under his palm, pulsing faintly. He could feel a connection, though he did not understand it. Lyra spoke softly, words flowing like a song. He did not know the meaning, but the tone was gentle, almost welcoming. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped close, so close he could see the shine in her eyes. She leaned her head slightly toward him, as if testing his reaction. Thomas stayed still, heart beating fast. For the first time in his journeys, he felt not just like an explorer, but like a guest. Lyra studied him for a long time. Then she pulled back, motioning with her hand. She pointed at the sky, at the stars above the trees, then touched her chest in his. Thomas understood only part of it. She knew he was from beyond the stars, and she was telling him that now, here, they shared this moment. Thomas nodded slowly, placing his hand over his chest and then pointing upward as she had done. Yes, stars, he said softly. She repeated the sound awkwardly. Stop. Both of them smiled, the word hanging between them like a fragile bridge. That night Thomas sat by the glowing stones with Lyra watching him from only a step away. The forest sang, the rivers whispered, and the sky burned with distant suns. He had come to the planet thinking it was empty, but now he knew better. It was alive, and in that life he had found something unexpected, an alien girl with silver eyes who had chosen not to run from him. The journey had only begun. The night in the glowing forest felt endless, but Thomas did not want it to end. He sat near the circle of stones while Lyra rested a short distance away. The light from the plants made everything shimmer, and the soft hum of the stones gave the air a strange calm. Thomas had been to many new worlds, but never had he felt this sense of quiet welcome. When the first light of morning touched the treetops, Thomas rose and stretched. The air smelled of wet leaves and fruit. He looked around to see Lyra already awake, watching him carefully. She had not taken her eyes off him for long. Her gaze was not hostile, only curious, like she was studying him as much as he was studying her. Thomas placed his hand on his chest and said again, Thomas. He spoke slowly, making the sound clear. Then he pointed at her. Lyra blinked and tapped her own chest. Lyra. The exchange felt simple, but it meant something important. Names were bridges. With names, they were not strangers. To show more, Thomas bent down and drew shapes in the dirt with a stick. He sketched a circle and pointed up at the sky. Star. He said the word carefully. Then he pointed at himself and at the shape of a small ship he drew. Ship. Lyra tilted her head, eyes shining with interest. She knelt down beside him and copied his circle, but hers had marks around it like rays. She touched it and spoke a soft sound Thomas could not understand. Then she pointed to herself, then to the trees around them. Her meaning was clear. She was of this world. He was from the sky, Thomas nodded. Even without words, they were building meaning. Later that morning, Thomas shared another piece of dried fruit with her. This time she took it without hesitation, though she sniffed it first with care. After tasting, she made the same soft approving sound as the night before. Thomas chuckled, offering her more. She accepted and pointed at the fruit bar, repeating a new sound. It was likely her word for food. Thomas repeated it, stumbling over the tone. She smiled faintly, correcting him by repeating it slower. He tried again. Their strange lesson continued for a long time. Thomas showed her objects from his pack, a water filter, a small tool for cutting samples, a light. She touched each one with wonder, though she jumped back in surprise when the light turned on. When he held it steady and shone it on his hand, she slowly reached out to wave her fingers through the beam, her eyes wide with amazement. At last she spoke a stream of words, pointing at the light, at him, then at the glowing plants. Thomas could not follow, but he guessed she was asking about the difference. He shrugged, smiling, and spread his hands as if to admit he did not know. She tilted her head again, then made a sound that could have been laughter. By midday, Lyra gestured for him to follow. She led him deeper into the forest. The path wound between massive roots and across streams where the water shone like liquid crystal. Thomas followed carefully, marking the way on his scanner so he could find the ship again. But he also knew this was more important than maps or samples. This was trust. They walked until they reached a ridge. From the top, Thomas saw a wide valley below. There were small huts made from woven plants shaped like shells and half hidden under trees. Smoke rose from fires. Figures moved between the huts, carrying baskets or tending to animals that glowed faintly in the shade. It was a village. Thomas felt his heart race. He was not meeting only one alien. He was meeting a people. Lyra pointed down, then looked at him. Her eyes seemed to ask if he understood. Thomas nodded slowly, his throat dry. This was bigger than he had expected. As they approached, the villagers noticed them. At once, voices rose. Several figures stopped what they were doing, staring at Thomas. Some dropped tools and stepped back. Children darted into huts, peeking out from behind woven doors. A group of adults moved forward, their faces tense, their hands gripping long staffs that shimmered faintly. Lyra raised her arms and spoke quickly, her voice urgent. She moved between Thomas and the group, gesturing toward him, then at herself, then repeating his name. "To mass," she said, pointing. The group muttered among themselves. Their eyes stayed sharp and cold, watching him like he was a threat. Thomas kept his hands open and low, his posture calm. He had to show he meant no harm. He bowed slightly, the way he had been trained for first meetings. An elder stepped forward, taller than the rest, with hair streaked in silver and skin marked with glowing lines. The elder spoke firmly, a string of words that Thomas could not follow. The tone, however, was not welcoming. Lyra responded quickly, her voice rising as she tried to explain. Thomas realized he had no way to argue for himself. All he had were actions. Slowly, he reached into his pack and pulled out the water filter. He moved toward a barrel near one of the huts filled with cloudy water. The villagers shouted in alarm, but Lyra raised her hands to calm them. Thomas knelt beside the barrel, dipped the filter, and showed how the water became clear when it passed through. He held out the cup of clean water to the elder. The elder hesitated but accepted it, sipping carefully. The elder's eyes widened slightly and a murmur ran through the crowd. It was not trust yet, but it was a start. The elder spoke again, softer this time, then gestured toward a hut at the edge of the village. Lyra motioned for Thomas to follow her there. Inside the hut, the air was cool and smelled of herbs. Mats of woven fibers covered the floor. Lyra motioned for him to sit. She sat across from him, her eyes steady. She pointed at herself again. Lyra. Then she pointed at him. Thomas, he nodded. Lyra. Thomas. Then she touched the floor, made a circle with her hand, and spoke a word slowly. She repeated it, looking at him as if waiting. Thomas guessed it meant ground or world or home. He repeated it carefully. She nodded. For the rest of the day, they shared words. She pointed at objects in the hut, saying their names, and Thomas repeated them. He pointed at his things, naming them in his own tongue, and she tried as well. Many times they failed to copy each other's sounds, but each mistake brought a small smile or a soft laugh. As the sun set, Thomas realized something important. Though the village had not yet accepted him, though the elder's eyes still held suspicion, Lyra had given him a place among them. She was building a bridge word by word, gesture by gesture. That night, as he returned to the edge of the forest under her guidance, Thomas looked back at the village lights glowing under the trees. He knew this was only the beginning. There would be fear, maybe even anger, but there was also hope. And all of that hope rested on a simple bond, one human, one alien girl, and the growing trust between them. The next morning, Thomas woke to the sound of soft whispers carried by the wind through the glowing forest. The air smelled damp and earthy, mixed with the faint sweetness of the forest fruits. He sat up, brushing moss from his uniform, and looked around. Lyra was already awake, kneeling nearby, her eyes fixed on the village in the distance. She pointed toward the village, then back at Thomas. He understood instantly. Something was wrong. Her gestures were urgent, her voice a series of short sounds. She tapped her chest, then his, as if asking him to understand that he must be careful. Thomas rose slowly, careful not to alarm her. He had already felt the tension in the village yesterday, but this time it was stronger. Something in the air felt heavier, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Lyra led him along a narrow path between towering roots, keeping them hidden from the main area. They crouched behind thick bushes, watching the villagers below. Thomas noticed that several adults had gathered near the central clearing. They were speaking quickly, pointing toward the forest, then gesturing with long staffs in their hands. The tone of their voices, though unknown to him, carried suspicion and fear. "They are scared," Thomas said quietly, though Lyra could not understand the words. She nodded sharply, her silver eyes wide with concern. Thomas understood the problem. In their stories, some humans had visited this world before, but they had brought destruction. Machines that poisoned the rivers, fires that burned the glowing forests, and plagues that left parts of the village empty. The villagers remembered. And now, here he was, a human, stepping into their world. He whispered to Lyra, "I need to show them I mean no harm." Lyra tilted her head and tapped her chest, then his, showing her trust in him. She was willing to help, but Thomas knew it would be risky. If the villagers saw him as a threat, it could end badly. He moved carefully to the edge of the clearing, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Lyra stayed behind, watching. Thomas tried to step lightly, speaking softly in his own language even though he knew they could not understand. Words were only part of communication. Action spoke louder here. The villagers froze as he stepped closer. One of the elders raised a hand, a signal Thomas had seen before. They were warning him to stop, but he could not retreat. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small water filter. He gestured toward a nearby stream, pointing at the murky water and then at the filter. Slowly, he poured some water through the filter. The clear liquid dripped into a small cup. He held it out to the nearest elder. The villagers murmured, some stepping back, others leaning forward to watch. The elder took the cup cautiously, lifting it to his lips. The silence was thick as he tasted the water. His eyes widened slightly. Then he lowered the cup and looked at Thomas. The human had not harmed the water. In fact, he had made it better. Thomas breathed quietly. One small action and trust was beginning. Lyra stepped forward, joining him. She spoke softly in her language, her voice flowing like a song, calming the villagers. She gestured at Thomas, showing that he had helped. The elders whispered among themselves, their suspicions slowly giving way to curiosity, but not all were convinced. A few villagers stayed at the edges, their hands still gripping staffs. Their eyes were hard, wary. Thomas could feel their doubt, and he knew it would take more than a single act to win their trust. As he worked to clean more water and repair small broken tools in the village, Thomas noticed a child watching him from behind a hut. The boy was small, wide-eyed, holding a glowing stone in his hands. Thomas smiled gently, pointing to the stone, then to his own hand. He tapped his chest and said, "Thomas." Then he pointed to the boy. The child repeated the gesture slowly, pointing to himself and speaking a small sound. Thomas nodded, understanding the boy's courage. Even the youngest could see he meant no harm. Hours passed, and Thomas worked alongside Lyra. They moved through the village, fixing small damages from old storms, cleaning areas that had been polluted and offering fresh water. Lyra stayed close, guiding him, translating his gestures as best she could. Slowly, villagers began to relax. Their movements were less stiff, their voices softer. But then a sudden alarm rang through the clearing. A guard shouted and villagers grabbed their staffs. Thomas froze. He looked toward the edge of the forest and saw a smoke signal rising. He did not know its meaning, but the villagers' reaction was clear. Danger. Lyra grabbed his hand, pulling him behind a tree. Her eyes darted to the clearing, then back to him. She spoke quickly, urgent sounds that Thomas could not understand. She pointed at the village, then at the smoke, then at the sky. He guessed something had arrived from beyond the forest. Movement flashed among the trees. Thomas could hear the snap of branches and the rustle of large feet. He crouched lower, keeping himself hidden. Lyra stayed close, her hands on his shoulder, guiding him. Then a group of large, strange creatures appeared. They were taller than any villager, with dark skin that shimmered under the sun and long arms ending in claws. Their faces were sharp, almost reptilian. They moved with speed and precision, scanning the clearing. Thomas realized they were not from the village. They were intruders, and they had brought the smoke signal to warn or summon. His heart pounded. He had not expected this. Lyra whispered something quickly, her voice trembling. She pointed at Thomas, then at the creatures. He understood her warning. They were dangerous, and he could not rely on anyone but her. Thomas nodded, gripping a small tool from his pack. It was not a weapon, only a device to create light or sound, but it could distract if necessary. He followed Lyra as she led him along a hidden path through the forest. The creatures moved swiftly through the village, examining huts, speaking in harsh sounds Thomas did not understand. They reached a small clearing hidden by thick vines. Thomas crouched, breathing hard. Lyra stayed beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They watched the creatures from the shadows, waiting. "We need to help," Thomas whispered. "We can't let them hurt the village," Lyra nodded. She stepped forward slowly, tapping the ground near one of the glowing stones. She made a sound high and clear that echoed softly. The creatures paused, turning toward the sound. Lyra repeated it more boldly this time. Thomas joined in, using a small light from his pack to shine briefly, drawing attention without causing harm. The creatures hissed and moved toward the noise. Thomas and Lyra led them in a careful circle, guiding them away from the village and toward a shallow ravine where the creatures could not easily move. The plan worked, though it required all of their attention and courage. At one point, a creature leaped toward Thomas, but Lyra pulled him back just in time. When the last creature disappeared into the trees, Thomas sank to the ground, exhausted. Lyra stayed close, brushing leaves from his shoulder. "Safe," she whispered. He nodded, heart still racing. They returned to the village as quietly as they could. Some villagers were out of their hiding spots, watching from a distance. They had seen Thomas and Lyra lead the intruders away. Their faces showed surprise, then relief. Slowly, the tension in the clearing began to ease. The elder from before approached Thomas, eyes narrowed but softer than before. He did not speak, only observed. Then he reached out and touched the ground lightly with his fingers. He gestured toward Thomas, then to the village. Thomas understood. They were acknowledging his help, though not fully trusting him yet. Lyra smiled, resting her hand briefly on Thomas's arm. Her gesture was simple, but it carried meaning. "You are not alone here." That night, Thomas sat at the edge of the village, looking at the stars above the trees. He had faced danger, and together with Lyra, he had protected the village. He realized how fragile trust was, how easily fear could turn a moment of peace into chaos. But he also knew that small acts, sharing water, repairing tools, standing with courage, could change hearts. Lyra had shown him that. She had taught him more about trust and friendship than any lesson from his fleet. He looked at her as she settled nearby, her silver eyes reflecting the stars. She was tired yet alert. She had risked herself to guide him and protect her people. Thomas felt a deep gratitude, mixed with something he could not name. The bond between them had grown stronger through the danger. They had faced fear together, and they had survived. He understood now that the future of this friendship, and maybe more, depended on the choices they made next. For the first time since arriving, Thomas felt a true connection, not just to a new world, but to a life beyond his own. Lyra rested her head briefly on his shoulder, and he could feel the warmth of trust, fragile but real. Tomorrow they would need to build more trust with the villagers, but tonight, in the quiet glow of the forest, they could simply be together, and for Thomas that was enough. The sun rose over the glowing forest, casting soft gold and blue light across the village. Thomas woke slowly, the events of the previous day still fresh in his mind. He had survived the danger with Lyra's guidance, but he knew the villagers' trust had not yet fully come. He had proven himself by helping with water and guiding away the intruders, but respect and acceptance would take more. Lyra was already awake, kneeling beside him. She had her silver eyes fixed on the village below. When she saw Thomas stirring, she gestured toward the huts. Her gestures were clear. Today, they would do more to help. Thomas nodded. He gathered his pack and followed Lyra down the hidden path into the village. Some villagers were already awake, stepping out into the clearing. They watched him closely, whispers passing between them. Thomas kept his movements slow, hands visible, showing no threat. Lyra walked slightly ahead, acting as both guide and translator, easing the tension. The elder approached first, his eyes cautious but curious. Tomas lowered himself slightly in respect. The elder touched the ground, then pointed to a hut with a damaged roof. Thomas understood. The storm from last week had left some buildings weakened, and he was being asked to help repair them. Lyra guided him to the hut. Thomas examined the damage carefully. The roof was partially collapsed and the walls were weak. He pulled out tools from his pack, showing Lyra and the nearby villagers how he could support the beams and reinforce the structure. The villagers watched closely, some stepping forward cautiously to help. As Thomas worked, he realized the villagers' fear was not directed at him personally. It was directed at what humans had done in the past. Other explorers had brought machines that destroyed forests, polluted water, and hurt their families. Thomas knew that one human could not undo centuries of fear in a single day, but he could show that humans were not all the same. Hours passed as Thomas repaired the roof. Lyra stayed close, passing him tools, adjusting beams, and translating his gestures. Slowly, a few villagers came forward to assist. A young woman handed Thomas a beam, nodding in acknowledgement. A boy brought him rope, watching with wide eyes as Thomas tied it to secure the structure. When the hut was finally stable, Thomas stepped back and wiped sweat from his brow. Lyra clapped softly, and soon others joined in, a quiet approval spreading through the group. Even the elder nodded once, a small smile on his face. Thomas felt a surge of hope. Trust was fragile, but it was growing. After a short rest, Lyra led Thomas to a stream near the village. The water was clear and flowing gently. Thomas knelt and began showing the villagers how to use the filter to clean water faster and more efficiently. Lyra translated each step, speaking slowly and clearly. The villagers watched, asked questions in their language, and learned quickly. Thomas marveled at their intelligence and adaptability. While he worked, a group of children gathered nearby. They were shy at first, keeping their distance. Thomas smiled gently and offered them pieces of fruit. One child hesitated, then took it, holding it close and tasting it carefully. Soon more children came forward, giggling as they mimicked Tomas's movements and repeated the sounds he made. Lyra laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. By midday, Thomas and Lyra had built a small system to carry water from the stream to several huts. It was simple, but it made daily life easier for the villagers. The adults whispered among themselves, glancing at Thomas with a mixture of admiration and caution. He had not only repaired damage, but he had also made life better without imposing his will or taking their resources. As the sun climbed higher, dark clouds began to gather over the forest. Thomas noticed the wind picking up, the trees swaying more aggressively. He realized another storm was approaching, perhaps more dangerous than the last. Lyra noticed it too and pulled him aside, urgency in her gestures. He understood. He needed to act quickly to protect the village and the trust he was building. Tomas ran through the clearing, helping villagers secure loose items, tie down beams, and guide livestock to safer areas. Lyra moved alongside him, translating his commands and calming frightened villagers. Together they worked as a team. The storm arrived with a roar, strong winds whipping through the village, rain pounding the ground. Thomas and Lyra stayed in the open as long as possible, directing villagers to safe huts and ensuring everyone was accounted for. Some villagers tried to help themselves, but Thomas's steady presence and clear instructions kept them calm. When the worst of the storm passed, the villagers emerged to assess the damage. To their relief, most of the huts were safe thanks to Thomas's earlier repairs. Some minor damage remained, but it was easily fixed. The elder approached Thomas, placing a hand on his shoulder. It was a gesture of respect, a silent acknowledgement of Thomas's courage and skill. Lyra smiled, brushing water from Thomas's hair. She rested her hand lightly on his arm, her silver eyes warm. "You helped," she said softly in her language. Thomas nodded, feeling a deep sense of connection. That evening, the villagers gathered around a fire in the central clearing. Thomas and Lyra sat nearby, sharing fruit and water. The elder spoke to the villagers, his voice calm and deliberate. Though Thomas could not understand the words, the tone was approving. He could feel the change. The villagers were beginning to accept him. Lyra leaned closer to Thomas, resting her hand on his. "They trust you," she whispered. "Slowly, but they do." Thomas smiled. "Thanks to you," he said. "I could not have done this without your help." She shook her head gently. "You showed them. Actions speak more than words. You helped when it mattered. That is what they see." Thomas realized she was right. Words were useful, but deeds were stronger. By repairing the huts, cleaning the water, and protecting the village from danger, he had shown that humans could be different. He had shown that he could be trusted. As night fell, Thomas looked up at the stars above the forest. He felt a sense of peace he had never known in his travels. The bond between him and Lyra had deepened, and he could see the beginnings of a bridge between humans and this alien world. Lyra rested her head briefly on his shoulder, a simple gesture of comfort and trust. Thomas felt warmth spread through him. He realized that this moment, small and quiet, was as important as any act of courage or skill. It was a moment of connection, the first real step toward friendship and understanding. The storm had tested them, tested the villagers, and tested Thomas's courage, and they had passed. Tomorrow they would continue to build trust, learning more about each other and the world around them. But tonight they could rest, knowing that the bonds they had formed were real and growing stronger. In the quiet glow of the forest, Thomas and Lyra sat side by side, watching the stars, feeling the calm after the storm. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. Fear and doubt would return. Challenges would arise. But for the first time, Thomas felt that he was not just a visitor. He was part of something greater, something worth protecting. The ruins stood like giants from another age, towers of stone and metal half buried in the sand of a forgotten world. The air was still, heavy with the weight of silence, as though the place itself waited for something. Ryan stood at the center of a wide chamber, the walls covered in strange glowing symbols. Mira stayed close to him, her head tilted as her luminous eyes followed the lights that pulsed whenever he moved his hand across the carvings. The others in the human crew watched with uneasy awe. They had traveled far to find this place, and they had risked their lives against those who wanted to destroy them before the truth could be uncovered. Now everything came down to this moment, Mira whispered, her voice soft but full of conviction. It responds only to you. The ruins recognize you. Ryan pressed his palm against the largest symbol. It blazed with light, spreading across the walls in ripples, as if the entire structure had been asleep for ages and was now waking. The floor trembled beneath their boots. Dust fell from the ceiling, but no one moved. All eyes were on the glowing lines that curved into patterns no alien mind could explain. Why me? Ryan asked, though the words were mostly to himself. He was no hero, no scientist, no soldier. He was simply a wanderer, a human far from Earth, caught in a story larger than his own life. Mira stepped closer, resting her head lightly against his shoulder, the way she had done the first time they met. Because you are human. Because you carry what others lost. Before Ryan could answer, alarms echoed through the ruins. The scanners lit up with signals. Enemy ships had arrived in orbit. The hostile fleets that feared humanity's hidden truth had tracked them here. The human crew exchanged sharp glances. They knew what it meant. If the enemy destroyed this place, the secret of humanity's connection to the ancients would be buried forever. Captain, one of the crew said, we have to hold them off. Buy time for Ryan. The captain gave a firm nod. Prepare defenses. No one touches him. No one touches her. The crew rushed out, leaving Ryan and Mira in the chamber. Outside, engines roared to life, weapons charged, and the sky above the ruins filled with fire as ships descended through the clouds. Mira touched the glowing wall again, her voice urgent but calm. The ruins are more than stone.
They are alive in their own way.
They wait for you to guide them. Ryan closed his eyes and pressed both hands against the wall. The light surged, wrapping around him like threads of energy. Suddenly he saw visions, not just of the ruins, but of stars being seeded long ago. Giant ships moved across the galaxy, carrying life, carrying dreams, carrying the beginning of humanity itself. His people were not late arrivals in the cosmos. They were the final branch of a tree planted long before. He gasped as the vision faded. We are the torchbearers. That's why. Outside, explosions shook the ground. Enemy ships unleashed fire upon the human defenders. The humans fought back fiercely, their smaller fleet darting between blasts with creativity and daring maneuvers no machine could predict. They were outnumbered, but their spirit made them dangerous. Inside the chamber, the walls shifted. Panels opened, revealing orbs of pure light hovering in the air. Mira reached for one, but it floated to Ryan instead, settling in front of him like a waiting companion. They will follow your command, Mira said with certainty. Ryan did not know how he knew what to do, but instinct guided him. He lifted his hand and the orb streamed upward through the ceiling, rising into the sky. Moments later, they appeared above the ruins, glowing like newborn stars. They swarmed into the battle, weaving through enemy ships, disrupting weapons and shielding the human fleet. From the ground, the humans cheered as they watched the tide turn. What had seemed hopeless was now a storm of light, and humanity stood at its heart. The enemy tried to retreat, but the orbs chased them, not to destroy, but to push them back. It was not annihilation, it was a warning. Humanity would not be erased. When the last enemy ship vanished into the dark beyond the system, silence returned. The orbs drifted down, fading one by one until only the glowing walls of the chamber remained. Ryan sank to his knees, exhausted but alive. Mira knelt beside him, her eyes soft with pride and relief. "You did it," she whispered. Ryan shook his head slowly. "Not me, us, humanity, we did this." The human crew re-entered the chamber, some with bruises, some with burns, but all alive. Their faces carried the look of people who had seen the impossible and survived. "What now?" one of them asked. "What do we tell the galaxy?" Ryan looked at the walls, at the glowing legacy of the ancients, and then at Mira, who still rested her head on his shoulder. "We tell them the truth. We tell them humans were not chosen because of power or weapons. We were chosen because we hold on, because we remember, because we hope," Mira smiled faintly. "Because when others fall into despair, humans keep walking." The crew stood together in silence, letting the words settle in their hearts. They knew the galaxy would not accept the truth easily. Many would fear it. Some would deny it. Others would fight against it. But it no longer mattered. Humanity had stepped into its place in the stars. That night, as the crew camped near the ruins, Ryan sat beneath the alien sky with Mira beside him. Fires burned in small circles, and the humans spoke quietly of home, of Earth, of family far away. Mira listened, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Your people are strange," she said softly. "You lose so much, yet you always speak of tomorrow as if it belongs to you." Ryan chuckled, though his voice was tired. "Tomorrow belongs to anyone who dares to reach for it." She leaned her head against his shoulder once more, her voice barely a whisper. "Then perhaps tomorrow belongs to all of us if we walk with you." Ryan did not answer. He did not need to. The warmth of her presence and the quiet strength of his crew were enough. For the first time he felt the weight of destiny, not as a burden but as a promise. The ruins behind them glowed faintly through the night, like guardians watching over the camp. Above, the stars stretched wide and endless, but no longer cold or indifferent. They were waiting, open to a future shaped not by fear or conquest, but by the stubborn spirit of humanity and those who would stand beside them. When dawn came, the crew prepared their ship. They would carry the story across the stars, knowing it would change everything. Humanity was no longer just another voice in the chorus of civilizations. Humanity was the echo of the ancients, the living bridge, the reminder that even in the vastness of space, hope could endure. As the engines roared to life and the ship lifted into the sky, Mira looked once more at Ryan and repeated the words that had begun it all. "You smell like home." And in that moment, Ryan understood. Home was not only a place, it was the bond between lives, the courage to protect each other, and the unshakable truth that humanity carried in its heart. Wherever they went, that home would follow, lighting the path for all who wished to walk beside them. The galaxy would never be the same.